Morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Visionary Annual Conference. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Debra Allcock Tyler to you. Some of you heard Debra yesterday, but this morning she's here as our keynote speaker. So early on in lockdown, Debra wrote an article which I kept with me, and it really inspired me. And this is one of the many reasons that Debra's here today. So what Debra wrote was, food is being delivered, medicines are being distributed, personal protective clothing is being made, emotional support is being offered, loneliness is being relieved, logistics is somehow just happening, and there is an abundance of caring, and this sector is the backbone of all of that. And for the last 6 months, if nothing else, what I have seen in the sight loss sector is an abundance of caring. It's been an absolute privilege, as I said yesterday, to be a small part of that. But the caring that the organisations have demonstrated over the last 6 months has been nothing short of breathtaking. So Debra's going to speak to us a bit this morning. For those of you who don't know her, I don't expect there are many people who don't know her. Debra is the Chief Executive of the Director of Social Change, and she's got lots of years of experience of training and coaching boards, chief executives and top teams. She's an experienced chair and she's a trustee of lots of charities. She's also a popular public speaker, and you're about to find out why. She's got a regular monthly column in the Third Sector magazine, and she's been on Radio 4's Moral Maze. So she's also an author of lots of interesting and fun books, one of which is this one, which, oh no, you can't see it because this screen goes really weird, you know, when it disappears. Anyway, Debra doesn't make any money whatsoever out of these books. It all goes to the DSC. And if you haven't read any of them, I would absolutely recommend them. They're really good. They're good fun. They've got brilliant quotes in them, and they're generally fabulous, just like Debra. So over to you, Debra. Thank you so much for being with us again today.
Thanks, Fiona. I tell you what, it would have been so much better for me if you'd said, look, she was the best we could dredge up. You know, just cope with her for the next 40 minutes or so and it'll be fine. Because the trouble is when you say, oh, she's great, it's like, oh no, the only way from here is downhill. Anyway, I'll do my best. And as I spent some time with some of you who are here today, yesterday, talking about what's going on at the moment. I think, you know, as I said, anything like this really is more like group therapy than anything else. You know, it's like, so this session basically is I'm just going to share with you how shit it all is at the moment. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know, you know, but then we'll have a good old cry and then we can talk about, you know, actually what are some of the good things that are coming out of this. But actually, I do think we have to realistically face the realities of where we are at the moment and kind of be truthful and honest with ourselves and with others about the dreadful state that our sector is currently in. Because if we're not honest and we don't face the facts and we don't know what the facts are, we can't make the case for the support that we need. And I feel particularly cross about this morning because the government's just announced, you know, however many billions of pounds that it's going to invest in the military over the next 4 years, and yet it's telling us it has absolutely no money at all to help to support our critical services. So I kind of feel a bit fired up and riled up this morning. So I'm going to share with you some key facts, some of which you will know, some you won't. So 47% of all of the income that comes into our sector comes from the public, comes from people generously putting their hands in their pockets. Half of that comes from effectively money in the tin, so, you know, fundraising efforts and things like that. And the other half comes from charity shops, fees for services, memberships, and that sort of thing. Of all the money, 29% comes from government, 9.5%, just under 10% comes from trusts and foundations. Only 5% from companies and about 1% for the lottery. And that actually tells you, if you think about all the company, and this is in normal times, of all of the companies that there are in the world, they only give us 5% of all of our income. And yet we get 1% just from one fund of the lottery. So it's, you know, so there's some work to be done about business interventions, although clearly right now is not the best time to be asking for that. So actually, most of us rely on the general public and the state for over 70% of our income. And that's why we're currently in so much trouble. And to make it even worse, NET, as the National Emergencies Trust, estimate that around 7 million people expect to need or use a charity services next year purely just because of COVID. Never mind about the normal use and the normal stuff that we are doing and to serving beneficiaries. And the interesting thing is that the challenge has actually not been really about what kind of charity you are or what sort of services you provide, but more about the business model. Most of us don't have substantial reserves. And in fact, I find it deeply frustrating. I don't know if any of you have been following the kids company trial that's going on in the courts. And this is where the trustees and the chief executive kids company are being taken to court by the official receiver to try and get them banned from ever working in charities, or certainly for whatever period of time, 10 years or 7 years or something like that. Anyway, the interesting thing is one of the arguments that the official receivers made is that, well, you know, the business model was very unstable. They couldn't guarantee when their next load of money was coming from. And I'm thinking, oh my freaking heaven. That's like every single bloody charity, you know, how else do you think we operate? None of us can guarantee where the money's coming from. We're all of us kind of like doing it a bit on a wing and a prayer. And I tell you what, we have to watch that case carefully, because if they're found, if the official receiver wins the case, it has got horrendous implications for us in the charitable sector in terms of risk management, in terms of attracting trustees and things like that. Not that I'm trying to scare you even more than you currently already are in the current circumstances. But anyway, so most of us don't have substantial reserves. And those that do, when we say like such and such got millions of pounds of reserves, typically they're tied up in assets which are not easily made liquid. You know, it's not actually that easy to sell a house, you know, or a building or property quite quickly. And the struggle isn't either about the size of the charity, big or small, most are struggling. The really tiny ones that weren't relying much on money anyway, the struggle for them is more about the fact that they can't provide physical, you know, contact with people. So the ones where money is an issue, but nonetheless, it's still a real problem for them because of the rules about, you know, gatherings and things like that. But it's much more about the revenue model. What we've been seeing in the research we've been doing is that charities that rely on trading and fundraising from events and face-to-face income have been the hardest hit. And I've always find this ironic because, you know, we've always been told in our sector that a trading model or a revenue model that relies on grants, for example, is very unsustainable, and really we ought to be selling stuff. And in fact, actually, it's those people who've been selling stuff are in the biggest trouble at the moment. You know, the charity shops that can't open and can't sell things are taking massive, massive hits to revenue for those charities conserved. So it's those that with direct debits from the public, those who have grants from trusts and foundations or grants from government or local contracts so far haven't been hit nearly as badly. All that stuff we were told made us unsustainable. Guess what? Turns out nothing wrong with that model. You know, a mixed model is always the better anyway. Having said that, though, of course, the government funding is going to be hit really, really badly next year, I'd say. So even though it's okay at the moment, it'll get worse. And also trusts and foundations who have been fantastic in my experience throughout this whole pandemic. You know, they've been committing to spending anyway. Some of them have been tapping into their capital, you know, and finding ways to carry on funding the sector. That isn't going to be able to carry on for very much longer, because clearly they've got to, you know, regroup and rebuild the revenue, because, you know, lots of them, we don't want them to go out of business, never mind if they don't. So they're not going to be able to sustain those levels of revenue. So next year, that more reliable funding, I'm fairly sure is going to be a lot tighter and a lot harder to access. You know, not to, you know, if you started off the morning depressed, you'll be really upset by the time I finish giving you all the stats. But anyway, so I think we've got to be aware of that. However, what I also do feel is that, and I think about my hairdresser, for example, when so she was really, really worried, her business, a local business, because they were closed down for such a long time, about what was going to happen. And of course, as soon as they were allowed to open, when was it, back in July, wasn't it? She was literally inundated. I mean, you couldn't get an appointment for love nor money. And my sense and my faith in the human beings that we live and work amongst in this country is that, given the opportunity, the moment we're freed to do fundraising events, community events, you know, dinners and all that kind of thing, I think we'll find a flood of people stepping up. Not perhaps with as much to give as they did before, because loads of us are going to be in real financial challenges personally next year. But I think that, you know, that spirit of humanity will be back again. Well, it hasn't gone away, but it's just, I think we'll see a comeback, really. However, it doesn't, you know, negate the fact that we're forecasting a total loss of income in this year alone, so to the end of 2020, of around 10 to 12 billion pounds just in our sector. In April, we'd already done the calculations and we knew it would be around about 4 billion, 4.2, I think was the number we came up with. And so we went to DCMS, we went to Oliver Dowden, and we, you know, said, look, you know, we're going to need some help here, otherwise vital services are going to disappear. And the government very generously, she said with extreme dripping sarcasm, gave us 750 million, which is absolutely pathetic, absolutely pathetic. And to put that in context, Tesco's a supermarket, got £588 million in rate relief in that same period because of the pandemic, which is effectively a government grant. It's £588 million of money that they were able to keep in their own business, despite the fact that they saw a 30% increase in sales. And at that same time, they dispersed £600 million in dividends in that same period. So basically, the rate relief, which is our taxpayers' money, got effectively distributed to Tesco shareholders and dividends. And what did we get? 750 million. And when we went back to Oliver Dowden and said, that's not enough, we can't possibly manage on that, it's really going to make no difference at all to most charities in the sector, the message we got back was that we're really ungrateful. We should be more grateful. Like, don't even get me started. I mean, just the breathtaking arrogance of it. And actually, it's not even true that we got 750 million, because the government said of that 750 million, 200 million had to go to the hospice movement. We're not even sure if the hospice movement has had all that money, because you cannot track down where this money has gone at all. Of that, also 120 million pound they withheld. So they said, right, we're going to keep some of it back. 85 million of it they reserved for match funding for funders, although they gave the trusts and foundations who applied for it something like a week to come up with programs that they could match fund for this 85 million pounds for it. It's been horribly badly done, and most of the funders are really unhappy about it. And the reality is we've got no clue where the rest of it's gone, and most of us haven't had a penny in help. You know, if I was to look around this room, I can't because I can't see any of you, but you know, to know that I doubt many of you in this room have had any of that money from government in the form of that help. Possibly some of you have, perhaps from some of the 200 million for the lottery. And then finally, almost all of that money came with a clawback clause. So actually, it's not even like it's definitely yours, whatever happens. There's a clause in there that says, for whatever reason, the government can take the money back. It's just ridiculous. On top of all of that, we're forecasting to lose around 60,000 jobs at the end of this year. And pretty sure there's more to come once the furlough scheme ends. I think we've had a temporary break on that because, of course, Rishi Sunak has extended the furlough scheme until the end of March. And I'll come to talk about how useless that is for us as a sector as well. But anyway, the furlough scheme to the end of March. So some people who would have lost their jobs won't have, but some still would have. So I'm pretty sure there'll be even more in March next year. The biggest problem we've got, I think, is that the government just doesn't understand our economic model. They introduced this furlough scheme to save jobs for people where there was no work. So it was a good thing to do. You know, it was the right decision. Although I hate this notion that it was very generous of the government to do it, because it's basically our money, for goodness sake. It's our tax money. It's not the government's money. They carry on as if it's our money and we're doing you favors. But actually, it was our money. And also I get very annoyed about those headlines that say, like, you know, our tax money is going to pay people to not work. Yeah, those people have been paying tax, and by the way, are still paying tax on their furloughed income. So that sort of thing annoys me. But anyway, so they introduced the furlough scheme to save jobs for people where there wasn't any work. And it makes sense. If the restaurants are closed, there's no work for chefs and waiters. If the salons are closed, there's no work for hairdressers or nail technicians and so on. But what they don't understand is that our model is so different. Our work doesn't stop just because, you know, whether we're open or closed, there's still people needing help. There's still people who are homeless, who are dealing with addictions or coping with grief or loneliness or mental health abuse or violence. No money doesn't mean no work in our sector. It does mean that in the private sector. If there's no money coming in, there's no work to be done. But in our sector, it's exactly the opposite. In fact, very often, the less money there is, the more bloody work there is for us. Nicole Seitz, who is she's the, I think, director of policy or something at Pro Bono Economics, have been doing a lot of the research around this area. I don't know if you saw, but she did an absolutely fantastic Twitter thread. I think it was yesterday or the day before, which I shared for those of you who follow me. And I pinched some of it out of here just because she really nailed the scale of the problem. She basically says furlough works if you run a brewery chain. You can send staff home when the pubs close and the orders dry up, but it doesn't work if you run a charity providing services to families of alcoholics, where you're seeing rising need and you can't bench your team because you'll still need to provide the service. So you can't furlough your staff. So you're not getting any government support whatsoever. And it is true, the coronavirus job retention scheme has saved sobs, not sobs, there are plenty of sobs in our sector, has saved jobs in our sector, but most charities just haven't been able to take advantage of it, precisely because they need to keep delivering for those who serve. So an awful lot of charities are using reserves or trying to find any way at all that they possibly can to keep going without actually getting any of that money back in. And the government just doesn't get it. I mean, we have written to them as part of our infrastructure group, which I'll talk about later, and we've asked them to consider for this next period of furlough a salary support scheme for our sector. So where we can get help with the salaries, but our staff can still be doing their jobs. So we don't have to, as Karen Bradshaw, who's the Chief Executive Charity Finance Group, has been a big leader in this. She says that we shouldn't be mothballing, we should be mobilising. We don't want to mothball our workers like it's happening in the private sector. We want to mobilise them to do more work. But they just don't understand it. I mean, I don't know if you heard Rishi Sunak back in April when he was talking about the job retention scheme and things like that. And he referred to the importance of preserving the gentleness of charities. Well, I snorted, my darlings. I snorted. I thought, oh, you know nothing, you silly man. There is absolutely nothing gentle about dealing with somebody who's fighting an addiction or dealing with grief or running from domestic violence. What the hell is gentle? You know, the charitable sector is brutal in a million ways, very often because the issues we're dealing with are really tough and hard and challenging. There's nothing gentle about working in a charity or being a volunteer. But it's this kind of, I don't know, this myth that certain sections of society have, that charity's kind of like fluffy and soft and it's all just like do good and feel nice. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but, you know, sometimes even the volunteers drive us up the wall. Well, you know, let's be honest, there are some volunteers who you kind of wish wouldn't. We never say that, of course. We always say we're always grateful for all of them. There's nothing gentle about working in our sector. Is it our fault that they don't understand? Maybe. You know, I think that for years, to a certain degree, I mean, collude is a strong word, but I think we've kept very quiet as a sector about the real value of ourselves. We've been so desperate just to get the money and not to offend anybody that we've kind of talked ourselves into the, you know, we have to have friends on the inside. We mustn't offend anybody because the money's going to disappear. But the reality is that, you know, I don't think that's done us any favors. At the moment, to be honest, they're not listening anyway. It really doesn't matter what we say. It's just literally falling on deaf ears. You know, to be honest, if we want to get a case in front of government, we need Marcus Rashford, really. You know, it's like they're listening to him. They're not listening to anybody else. And the other thing is, like, we're told, for example, that we can take out COVID loans. So DSC did take advantage of a CBILS, a coronavirus business interruption loan, which can I just honestly encourage all of you to consider. The terms are fantastic. It's government backed. It doesn't make your trustees vulnerable. You know, it's really, really helped to save DSC, and you pay it back over 6 years. First year, no interest. I mean, honestly, please investigate it if you're worried about your cash. Anyway, the thing is that those loans work in the private sector where, you know, if you provide luxury hats, you can take a risk on it. But if you're a small sight loss charity, it's probably much harder to bet your future income or commit it to paying off a loan. Never mind the fact that funders very often don't like to know that some of their funds are going to pay off a loan that you took out. Having said that, of course, I would say that now the situation is slightly different. So in the past, you know, if you've got a grant, you know, it would come with, you can't use that to pay off interest and loans. But I think for next year, it will be very different. And for a few years coming ahead, funders will be seeing it very differently. So I'd honestly encourage you and your trustees to let go of your fears about taking on that sort of money to get you through this period. You know, it honestly works out at a very small amount of money each month, really. You know, so do consider that. But actually, anyway, in the research, only 7% of charities have actually gone and got COVID loans because, again, you know, our trustees tend to be super cautious. This is what's so crazy about, you know, we can't be trusted with money. Quite the opposite in my experience in our sector. If anything, I think our trustees are far too cautious about money. And you know, anyway. And also Nicole talks about, you know, the money that's coming out from government generally into society. And she talks about speed, hoops and scale, you know, and she basically compares the private sector with the voluntary sector. And actually, Nicole, it does please me because she came from the private sector. And, you know, so often in our sector, we're told like we should learn from the private sector. They're so much more efficient and better run than we are. Bollocks, frankly. But anyway, we're told all that. And Nicole has come into our sector and she said, oh, my God, you know, I had no idea how much harder it is for charities to actually get on and do business than it is for the private sector. I thought we had a tough ride in the private sector, absolutely nothing compared to the charitable sector. And it's always so gratifying, isn't it, when somebody from another sector comes in and says, oh, my God, I now realize what you've been on about all this time. Anyway. So she talks about speeds, and the grants for businesses went out immediately in April. So they announced that there were grants, and that money was dispersed so quickly, it's untrue. Our charity money got allocated via various different government departments, via the lottery, foundations, etc. And only now in November, bear in mind this 750 million was announced in April, only now in November has the National Lottery Communities Fund come out and said that the £200 million that they were due to distribute has been allocated, but they can't actually say whether it's in folks' banks or yet or not. Now, I don't blame the lottery for that. DSC, amongst others, did an FOI to the lottery which got rejected anyway, that's another story, but because we're pretty sure that the government's been interfering in where the grants are given and stuff like that. And in fact, one point we found out, I think about 1.2 million was being paid to I forgot the name, private sector accounting firm, I can't remember the name of them now, but anyway, to like scrutinize the lottery's recommended grants. I mean, don't even get me started on that. Anyway, and the charities anyway that have to apply for that money have to go through incredible hoops and loops that businesses just don't. Businesses basically apply for these grants and effectively give, here's our business, here's our postcode, you know, here's our bank details, and that's it. We have to like, well, you know what it's like for us in the sector to like apply for grants. It's pages of blooming forms, half the time offering stuff that's entirely irrelevant. We've got to prove impact, and also the other thing we've got to do is prove viability, which businesses don't have to in the same way. It's so frustrating. And here's the thing, charities employ as many people as financial services. We generate about £200 billion in value each year, which is about 10% of GDP. And charities are expected to run air ambulances, cure chronic diseases, support people with sight impairments. We're asked to deal with some of the hardest, most difficult issues in society, and they don't think we're worth supporting. It's incredible. Okay, if you're not sobbing by now, I haven't done my job. In fact, Fiona and Sarah specifically told me, make them cry. They need a good weep. So if you're not sobbing, I've done something wrong. But it isn't all awful. And this is the, you know, so now I'm to things to hang on to. Whatever you think about our parliamentary system, the House of Lords is firmly on our side, and they are doing everything they can to fight the case for charities, both charities generally and also specifically in subsectoral areas. I know you have your own sight loss lords who are absolutely fighting for, you know, your particular section of our sector. And in fact, for example, really practical stuff. So only a couple of weeks ago, the Lords passed a statutory instrument. I'm not going to go into the technical details, but basically allows amendments to the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act. And what that means is that you can continue to trade, so you can continue to operate as a charity, even if you're struggling for cash, if you have reason to believe that you can recover in the longer term. And what that means is if you're not paying your debts, your creditors can't force you into insolvency because you haven't paid the bills. And that's a really good thing, because that gives you breathing space. It means you don't have to panic and say, I can't see any money coming in the next couple of months, we need to close down. What you can do is think again and say, right, what can we do? What actions can we take right now? And I think that's good. So, you know, that means that we're not being forced into panicking and thinking we've got to close immediately because we're running out of cash. It's giving you time to breathe and to think and to reset and to see if there are other solutions. We've also got a body of infrastructure groups who are collaborating and fighting on your behalf. So as I mentioned earlier, we've just recently sent the letter to the Treasury asking about the job support scheme. Over 120 of the infrastructure, so the membership bodies basically of our sector have signed up to that. If you want to sign up to that letter, just email Roberta Fusco and the Charity Finance Group, and you can add your name to that letter. Over 120. And there's also a growing number of MPs on both sides of the House. So this isn't sort of a Labour Conservative issue, who are very sympathetic to our plight, including Julian Knight, who's a Tory MP, but he's the chair of the DCMS Select Committee, which is, of course, is the government department to which charities as a whole belong. And they're very, very, very sympathetic to our plight. Further to that, because DSC has been so angry about this £750 million, A, that it's not enough, and B, we've got absolutely no idea how much of it has been dispersed and where it's going. We were in conversations with the National Audit Office, and as a result of those conversations, they announced this week that they're launching an investigation into the government and its use and disbursement of that money. There won't be a report till next spring, so it's not going to help us in the short term, but at least we're holding them to account. And the NAO, I don't know if any of you have come across them, they're the most wonderful people. It sounds weird, doesn't it, the National Audit Office, but anybody who's ever worked from there, they're fantastic people, and they're incredibly, obviously there'll be an independent investigation, so they're not biased, but it's just really great news for our sector that they felt that our cause and our case was strong enough to actually pick this up and do an investigation. And of course, the other really great news is that Baroness Stowell, who's the chair of the Charity Commission, is stepping down. I don't know if any of you have come across her. I'm sure she's a lovely person in real life. She refused to meet me, but you know, hey. But under her chairing, the relationship between our sector is the worst it has ever been. I've worked in this sector for 35 years and I've always had relationships like that with the Charity Commission. I love them. I think they're fantastic. I think the staff are brilliant, absolutely. But under her chairmanship, we've been told that we're ignorant, we don't understand our public, we're arrogant, you know, that anyway, it is just awful. And she's stepping down, so that's good. We, amongst others, have written to the DCMS, urging them to encourage the government to make a non-political appointment. Honestly, I can't see that happening. I think it probably will be a job for somebody's mate somewhere, but you never know. And at least we're trying to get the system changed and trying to make it so it's slightly more independent. Technically, the Charity Commission is a non-departmental public body, which means it reports to Parliament, not the government. But the problem the Commission has is, of course, its funding comes via the Treasury, which is run by the government. So it's always had to court government. It's never been able to be truly independent. Anyway, we'll see. So we're on it. We're making the case. And then I think the other probably most important thing is that in my over 35 years in our sector, I have never seen such levels of collaboration and cooperation between charities. I mean, so many old petty rivalries and backstabbing of our fellow charities has mostly melted away. Well, for now anyway. You know, I always say, when people talk about how lovely the people in the charitable sector must be, I'm always like, you know, well, up until this year, some of the most backstabbing, self-serving, self-aggrandizing bastards I've ever come across at working in our sector. And you know how we're all lovely to each other at the faces in conference and go, well, I don't know why they got the bloody money, because, you know, we would have done a much better job with it. So we've been fighting and competing for money. But actually, I think that, and those are understandable and often very amusing or sometimes quite damaging, but that just seems to not be around them. And I think we've come together in the most fantastic way to recognize and support each other and trying, and, you know, and also how many of us are trying to share resources, you know, with other charities that are struggling, like, you know, nip on my Zoom account if you can't afford to pay for the Zoom, and, you know, how can we help each other out? And I think that's incredibly, incredibly encouraging. And although none of what I've said is going to help right now in the immediate moment, you know, our sector is incredible. We've survived all sorts. We've survived all sorts of governments of all sorts of different flavours. We've survived wars and depressions and civil unrest and economic meltdowns, and we're still here as a sector. We're actually indomitable. You can't, individual charities may die, but us as a sector on the whole survive. And of course, the reason we survive is because it's about the fact that human beings basically at their fundamental core want to help each other. They do. And charities are really the vehicle that kind of makes it possible for people to come together and to support each other. And I think that's inspiring and wonderful, and something, you know, yeah. I mean, we survived the 2008 financial crash, for goodness sake. We're one of the most stable sectors. And I think it's because we don't give up. We don't say to our beneficiaries, look, I'm sorry, love, there's no money. You're going to have to cope alone. We say, there's no money. Let me have a look at how else I can help. Is there anywhere else I can send you to support? Is there anybody that I can get to come in? We are just amazing. We don't whinge and complain. Well, we do a bit, but we get on with it and we try and fix things out. We never walk away because there isn't any money. We commit ourselves to our causes and we do what we can to serve those who need us. And it always makes me laugh about this issue around volunteering and how, you know, they talk about this volunteering passport, which I kind of get, but I've never met a volunteer who volunteered just for volunteering. Most of the volunteers I meet volunteer because they care about a cause. They don't volunteer because they want to help support social and economic regeneration. You know, I've never heard a volunteer who does that. They volunteer because they want to help people with sight loss, or they want to help people with cancer, or they want to help animals. And those people still exist. They're really committed to our causes. And I would say to you, it's still your biggest sell, whether you're asking for money or asking for support for volunteers or whatever. Speak to the heart. It's the cause that creates the commitment. Always, always, always. It's never the business case. You present the business case so that people can justify their emotional decision. That's the reality about facts, isn't it? But speak to the heart. Talk to them about the individuals, the human beings. Tell the stories. That's what will get you the money. I was saying to a small group of you in that little group I was in yesterday with Fiona and Hayley were in there. And I was talking about, like, in 2011, I very nearly lost my job. It was a horrible time. And I can remember I was in this really frightening period when I didn't know what was going to happen. I went home and, you know, spent time with my parents. And I spoke to my father about the stress that I was in. And I said, you know, Dad, I could lose my job. I was newly divorced, so broke, as you can imagine, and all the rest of it. And I said to him, I don't know how I'm going to get through this, Dad. I could lose my job and also my reputation and never be able to work in the sector again. And, you know, that'd be the end. And he said to me, Debs, he said, all of the attitude, the commitment, the courage, the skills that got you to where you are now, you will still have those. Nobody can take those away from you. They can take away your salary and they can take away your reputation, but they cannot take away the essence of what got you there. You still have that. And all you do is you take those things forward and you apply them to the next thing. And I think that's true of us right now. No matter how much we feel beaten down and tired and exhausted with all of this, we've still got our guts and our determination and the things we've learned and the skills and the support and the love of the people that we help. That's still with us. And we just have to hang on to that and focus on that. And that will be there to take us forward in the future. So you've got what it takes to get through this and get through to the other side. And if you have to shrink, shrink. There's no shame in that. There's no shame in it. Success in our sector is not about how big you are. You know, you'll forgive me, but that's a very male paradigm. You know, it's about size, and you know, it's not. In our sector, it's about, are you doing what you were set out to do within the best abilities of your resources? That's what you're there for, not to grow or to be huge or whatever. I mean, if growing is a consequence of the work, that's fine. But if it's your objective, there's something badly wrong. Our job is about serving our beneficiaries for the public benefit. And also remember that the struggles you're facing right now, they are not your fault. If you haven't got money coming in, it is not your fault. It's not because you failed. It's not because you've been rubbish. It's not because your fundraising team is shit. It's because everybody is in the same boat and we're all scrabbling about for the same amount of money. You are not failing. You are not failing. The system may be failing, but you are not failing. And please hang on to that. Do not blame yourselves for what is going on right now. And I cannot say that enough. Just remember how awesome you are. There are people out there who, if I asked them, would say that you make their lives immeasurably better, that without you, they don't know what they do. You know, and that's true of most of our sector. You've got to remember that. I couldn't be prouder to work in our sector. I always have been proud, actually. I'm passionate about us. And I've always said that, you know, the real test of commitment and leadership is not when things are going well, because when things are going well, anybody can shine. The real test is when things are really tough and brutal. How do you step up and how do you show up? And oh my goodness me, we are showing up so incredibly. It actually makes me quite weepy. We're all absolutely knackered beyond belief, worried about our charities, about the people that we serve, our causes. We're worried about our families, our health, ourselves, and yet still we get up and we keep going. And I'm so incredibly proud of you, So I'm going to end with one of my favorite quotes, which I don't apologize for if you've heard me say this before, but it's the thing that really keeps me going, because it is tough. I mean, there are moments when I've like gone to bed and cried and just curled up and just thought, oh, why am I doing this, you know? But when I'm in those really bad moments, it's this thing that keeps me going. And this is what I want to end with. This is the true joy in life. The being used for a purpose considered by yourself to be a mighty one. The being thoroughly used up before you're thrown on the scrap heap. The being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community. And as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die. I want to arrive at the gates of heaven with a bottle of champagne in one hand, a packet of fags in the other, saying, I can do no more, let me in. That was Deborah, by the way, not George. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die. But the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It's a sort of splendid torch that I've got hold of for the moment. And I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, we will come out the other side. You are absolutely incredible. You shine a light that is so bright it can be seen everywhere. And I love you for it. Thank you.
Debra, that was absolutely brilliant. I have no idea how to follow that. So I'm not even going to try. You were amazing, absolutely amazing. And I love that quote, and life is no brief candle, particularly for someone like you. Thank you so, so much. Thank you for doing that. I don't think, Sarah, we have time for questions or anything, do we? maybe a couple of comments.
Maybe a couple. So just if people aren't familiar with the platform, there's a Q&A box that you can type into, or if it's more accessible to you, there's a raise your hand, and we could come to you. But yeah, we literally only have 5 minutes left. But yes, there is. I mean, it's not a question, but we've already had a comment come through from Chloe Burr-Pixton, who says, this is not a question, but I just want to say exactly the right words at exactly the right time. And yes, people are just singing your praises, Deborah. Nick Dimitriad is saying, brilliant and inspiring as always, even better than your 20 espressos talk a few years ago. Yes, people, I mean, really, people are saying inspirational, just what they needed at this time. So,
well, I believe every word of it, every word of it.
I think, Deborah, the way that you got that message across about we're not failing, because, you know, in so much of that government rhetoric, that's the subtext. So folks, I've just had a message up to say my internet is unstable, so just in case I disappear, I've not taken the huff. It's just good old Virgin Media. So yeah, we are not failing. I mean, how the work that these people in the room are doing during these circumstances in this time, that's incredible success. Absolutely, you know, even if it doesn't feel like that, it is success to be able to pitch up every day and keep doing stuff and find ways round all of these obstacles and issues. Your figures were eye-wateringly alarming. Yeah.
Can I just ask Deborah one question before she goes? Someone, Stuart Clayton's asked, if there is one piece of advice you can give leaders of charities right now, what would it be?
Stick it to the man. I don't know. Actually, I would say stand up for yourselves. Like, let's stop pussyfooting around. Let's absolutely tell the truth and speak truth to power. We're having this big debate in the collaborative group at the moment about, you know, do you stay on the inside of the corridors of power and be nice to people, or do you, you know, and I'm like, it's not working being nice to them. It's not working. So, like, you know, let's stand up for ourselves, because people need us. They need us. Actually, the other thing I would say, try and get sleep. It really helps if you can sleep. You know, that would be the other piece of advice.
I think that is really good advice, Deborah. You know, you can't function on very little sleep, and it just impacts on everything. So, yeah, I think that's great. So, are we done, Sarah? In terms of,
I mean, I think a lot of people wish they could stand up and give her a round of applause.
Well, let's us hand clap.